Thank you so much. Great to be here on the show.
All right. It was good to have you there. And we're going to have a great show tonight talking about one of my favorite topics, synchronicity. And I got to tell you, I've had a lot of that in my life.
Have you?
Yeah. So it'll be good. But before we get going, why don't you just kind of give a rough history of yourself to the audience?
Well, I started, playing music when I was really young. I transferred from that into college, started studying physics. I've always been interested in, what's the meaning of life? I grew up in a household that was raised with an Eastern religion, yogic philosophy. So I learned about, there's an underlying reality and a secret underlying hidden reality to things from an early age. Mm-hmm. So I started wondering about synchronicity in my 20s. And I had a physics background, so I started asking, a synchronicity is a alignment in space and time. I wonder if there's some way we could describe that with physics, right? Because that's space and time. Mm-hmm. So I've been a high school teacher. I've been a software programmer. I've been a musician, and I've got a master's degree in physics. And I've spent a couple of years with funding to research that. I published a paper just this past year called Space-Time Paths as a Whole in the journal Quantum Reports, which goes into a fundamental reimagining of the basic equations of quantum mechanics in the form of Fourier transforms, which are essentially the mathematics of holograms, which we'll talk about more tonight.
Wow. Mathematics of holograms. There are a lot of people on the internet say that we live in a holographic universe.
Well, that's the idea. So
you kind of go along with that?
I try and develop that idea explicitly as far as it can go. Mm-hmm. And so, and in a sense, we live in this virtual-like reality is what I call it. It's not virtual in the sense that it's not real. It's very real, but it has elements of a virtual reality in which I think that we're learning. We're here to learn and grow on a journey or a quest. Mm-hmm. So I think that the metaphor to virtual reality is a great one.
Mm. So do you believe in multiple lives, reincarnation?
I don't have a stance on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think there's a lot of things that we can ask and we don't know the answers to. My particular perspective is there's one question that I think I can actually answer, which is synchronicity a real phenomenon? Mm-hmm. Or is it just psychological or is it physical? And so I've really focused my efforts on answering that one question and thinking that from there, it might lead to some other answers.
Synchronicity to me almost indicates that there is a purpose or a design or a direction. If that is the case, wouldn't it mean that somebody would have to be watching our lives?
Well, that's a really deep question. The short answer would be yes, but the other part of that answer is, can we even envision what that somebody is? Is it a higher self? Is it our higher self? Are we connected to that divine being? Is it separate from ourselves? I'm not so sure. And so I think that a lot of these questions, we try to answer them from our limited perspective, what I call a partial story. Mm-hmm. And we can't grasp the whole story, which is what one of the beautiful things that the hologram metaphor brings into view. We can always take a perspective on life, but we can't know the whole thing.
Do you think that knowledge and truth, that cannot be changed, is on the planet at all times, but the pieces to make that truth demonstratable is segmented, is put in different people around the world, and they attempt to find each other. And then if they can, they bring a piece to the actual truth, but they don't have the whole truth?
I definitely think that's true. The question of what is the truth, I think, is really, a questionable question to begin with. Do we ever, once we have what we think is the truth, do we know that that's actually the final truth? I'm going to share more about this idea of partial stories, that we have a particular perspective on the world. And if the world is like a hologram, what a hologram does is you and I can look from different angles at a hologram, and we'll see different perspectives on the same scene. Maybe it's a city, and I look from the left and I see a building. You look from the right, you see a stop sign. It's not because there's different scenes there, it's because you're looking at different aspects of the same scene. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting about that is we're looking at the same place in the film. We're looking at the same physical location in space, and we see something different. So there's this way in which, if the universe is really a hologram in some way, is it programmed to make us see different things when we look at the same situation? You and I can look at the same newscast, and have very different interpretations of what's being said and what's happening. I think that's fundamentally at the core of what's happening in the polarized discussions that we're having today.
And I wish it wasn't so polarized, actually. You know, I mean, like, I'm thinking, are we ever going to evolve as a species? I mean, do we have to have this fighting going on forever? Why can't we use our technology to solve hunger? You know, and you know, I don't want to. I guess I got to say, stop the wars, you know, or don't cause them. But the thing about that, Sky, is that there's only so many people that believe that. I mean, the other people got to be convinced that this feudal way of living seems like we're still in the barbaric age, man. I mean, you look at, you know, kind of the Star Trek thing, how that even back in the 60s, they say, well, you know, like the planet Vulcan said, you know, Spock said, you know, our planet used to be like Earth's planet. You know, we're always fighting. And then finally we blew ourselves up and realized we got to stop. And then we believe that logic should, you know, and logic. Now, the problem with logic, though,
Let me talk about truth for a minute again.
Okay, go ahead.
The truth is difficult. I think that we're all seeking truth. We're all seeking to be good people. And, you know, an example of what I think to be the truth, the way I see the truth that we're looking for, is just a very simple example with my daughter. You know, she comes to me with a question about her homework. Mm-hmm. Now, what's the whole truth of this situation? And by the way, my fingers are blue because my daughter and I were doing a science project today,
nice.
Trying to make crystals, and I didn't realize I was going to get permanently marked.
Nice.
So she comes to me with a question about homework. Okay, what do I hear? Well, my filters here, okay, I need to save the day. I need to give fatherly advice. I need to step in with some criticism and critique around how to help her, right? Mm-hmm. But what she's actually looking for is she's having the experience of, I'm stuck, I'm frustrated, I just need a little bit of effort to get unstuck, and then I want to go back to doing it myself. And so this causes a differentiation. If I approach her with I'm going to solve the problem, I'm missing the truth. And the truth here is that what she's needing from me is very specific, and I miss that because I have a filter in my head. Mm-hmm. So I don't look for grand truths, like what's the truth of the cosmos or who's responsible for, you know, the things going on in the world right now. Mm-hmm. I look for what is the situation that is right in front of me that I'm missing.
Well, that sounds to be more appropriate. I mean, more life-changing than knowing. I mean, philosophers have sought the answers to the same questions since the beginning of time. Plato and all of them, man. Just, you know, what is life? Why are we here, man? Sky, we can't get the answer, man. And I don't think I want to hear from some ET coming down and saying, "I'm your daddy." That's not going to help me none.
Right. So when we have a discrepancy in what we believe about something, whether it's, you know, who's responsible, or how did the you know, situation come about with the health crisis right now, mm-hmm. or, you know, what's going on with climate change, we need to look at a deeper level at what are people experiencing. And the first step for me in accessing wholeness is listening with the intent of really learning from somebody. And this means like being willing to have my mind changed. And how often do we approach a situation where we're really willing to have our mind changed? Mm-hmm. I don't think it's very common for us, because mm-hmm. we usually listen because we want to like figure out what our next point is. Mm-hmm. So in order to listen to change our minds, we have to be able to know, you know, what am I holding on to? What am I feeling inside that is important to me? What am I scared about? You know, a lot of times we're driven by holding on to, you know, what we're afraid is going on and trying to make our point. So we have to be aware of all that stuff and be able to let go of it enough to leave space for someone else mm-hmm. to share their perspective. And, you know, the thing about a hologram, I can look from the left, I see one thing. You look from the right, you see a different thing. It's the same whole. We see different things. Mm-hmm. But those two whole pictures are really, you know, my partial view and your partial view both feel complete to each of us. Mm-hmm. You know, what I read in the news makes me feel really, really clear about what's going on. But what you read, the same thing you read, you're going to have a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And so is there a way in which both of these wholes can make a bigger whole that doesn't contradict? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's this notion in physics of complementarity, wave and particle duality. You're familiar with that, probably from, you know, hearing about quantum physics. Mm-hmm. You know, there's this way in which we asked for over 100 years, is light or electrons a wave, or are they a particle? And different experiments will show different things. And it wasn't until Niels Bohr came along and illustrated that he came up with a new principle, complementarity. Mm-hmm. There can be a complete view called the wave view. Makes perfect sense, describes everything. Mm-hmm. Except you do a different experiment and there's a whole complete view called the particle view. And these are not contradictory of each other. They can both exist as part of a greater whole. And that's my hope, is that by dropping from our mental analysis and into an understanding of our hearts and listening from our openness, we can become able to integrate the parts into a greater whole.
See, I'm kind of wondering what holds those particles together. Why are they in a certain place when you look at them? So I will go to the group that they are there, but what's holding them in place, man? I don't know. Hey, listen, as you know, we got questions coming in, so let's go ahead and take a couple of those real quick, and we'll go back to our discussion. This come from the live chat and from our guest question link at the top of our menu. All right. Gio says, Sky, is quantum mechanics the same as string theory, a third dimension?
Third dimension. Well, quantum mechanics is a theory that came along in the early 1900s to describe particles like electrons and protons, and that we can't see. And quantum mechanics, I like to say, is the study of what the world is doing when you're not watching it. We're used to physics and science being about observation. What happens when you're not observing? Well, we describe things as evolving into many possibilities. And it's these possibilities that I associate. I go from there and I start to develop an idea of how synchronicity can evolve and unfold from the unknown possibilities. And string theory is a theory that tries to, build upon quantum mechanics, improve upon it in terms of talking about, instead of particles, we're talking about little strings. I think that there's problems with the theory, but there's ways I'd like to see it evolve and improve. But I think that the synchronicity. Shall I give a story of synchronicity which illustrates?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay. So synchronicity is not just a happy-go-lucky, coincidence that solves your problems. It's also the way in which life can get in the way. So I had this experience where I owned a home at the time, and we found a problem with the wall. We had mold in the wall. So we had to deal with that. And we took the wall apart and decided to hire a contractor. Now here I am. I'm dealing with, my family's kind of stressed out. I'm trying to manage their feelings. I'm stressed out about whether we're going to solve this problem. And so I go to the contractor and I say, hey, whatever you need to do, just do it. Like if you need to find some product and spray in there or whatever, just do it. And then I have to go to work that day. So the day he's starting, I give him these instructions and I leave. Now there's two mistakes I make there. One is that I'm carrying a lot of emotion. So I'm saying, I'm afraid this isn't going to work out well. So I'm giving an extra impetus of emotion in what I say. Like, make sure you solve the problem. Do whatever you have to do. Well, that's a open field day for synchronicity to say, oh, okay, I can come in here and really mess things up. and furthermore, I just gave him blanket instructions. I didn't tell him exactly what to do. So I left the door wide open for his judgment. Well, I come back at the end of the day, and he bought a product that was not the right product to use, caused a big problem in our house. And the next 3 months was me trying to undo that problem, trying to get our room back in shape. Finally, at the end of 3 months, I break down in my room, my office late at night. I'm just like, I can't. Everything I'm doing is making this worse. Everything I try to solve is creating a negative synchronicity where things are falling apart. I try to get an answer from him. He responds with an angry email, whatever it might be. And I ask, what do I pray in that moment? What do I need to do to solve this problem? Because I don't have the answer. And what I realized in that moment, I felt in my body the fear that I was carrying. And I just automatically opened up myself to that feeling of fear. I stopped resisting it. I allowed it to just happen. I allowed it to sort of move through me, allow a different sort of heart-based divine spirit to enter into me, just allow that allowance. And I will say that over the next 3 weeks, I made different decisions. So instead of resisting the contractor's request for information, and he wanted me to let him off the hook so that I could get a new contractor. And I wouldn't do it until this point when I was like, I got to let him off the hook because he's not going to give me the plans until I do that. So in the course of the next 3 weeks, by opening myself up and having a different mindset, synchronicity started to unfold where I started to bring in the solutions, and we had the problem solved within 3 weeks. So, in life, when we're faced with fearful situations that cause us to be reactive, we tend to make decisions that close our minds and cause problems for ourselves. And I think synchronicity is a responsiveness. It's the way that the universe is responding to us. Mm-hmm. And so our mindset really plays a big aspect of that. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about, the polarization that's present in the world right now, I think it's important to see this as a relative thing. Each side thinks that they have the truth. Each side thinks that they're trying to be good and the other side is evil. And I don't think there's any such thing as this evil intent. I think everybody's trying to do the best they can, but we have trouble seeing the different perspectives because we're stuck in a fearful mindset in ourselves.
Or a paradigm. I'm sure you're aware of a Schrodinger's cat, which is the thought experiment about the paradox of the quantum supposition. But in that, basically the idea is you have a cat and the cat is both dead and alive. But does synchronicity, when you open that box for the mirror, and those are just two outcomes, but I believe there's an unlimited amount of outcomes that could be in the box. Maybe it's not even a cat.
Right.
But you're opening your box of life.
The monkey.
It could be a monkey. Nobody likes a monkey. I definitely don't like a monkey. Okay.
Schrodinger's monkey.
There's a freaking monkey, man. Well, I don't know if he had a pet monkey, but they got these gnarly teeth, man. So they're kind of like nutcrackers. I can't stand them either because at night they get up and they walk around. But that's another story. But does the synchronicity, does it make the choice of what's in the box when you open it?
Well, I think that what we do when we experience synchronicity, we're going through our day every day with an anticipation of what's going to happen next. And this is where it's so important to realize that when I go through my day anticipating that I'm going to read something that pisses me off, I'm going to be looking for those things. Mm-hmm. And what I'm suggesting is that the universe is actually conspiring to trigger us, to make us angry, to make us confused. It's not people out there that are conspiring against us. It's the cosmos itself. It's trying to figure out if it can confuse us. And it's in doing so, it's making us get clear on who we are in the world. What is our authentic self? But until we get to that point where we know who we are, we're just going to be sent situation after situation that makes us go even more into our biases, even more into our perceptions of what we think the world is
it's
made
interesting
of.
you bring that up because there's several sections to the show between 8 and 8:30 when you come on or the guest comes on. We have introductions. We recognize the people in our live chats. We have 2 live chats going on, and Jade, our moderator, handling all of it. And then, but we also have a bear report. And what happens is I call Bear. He's at an undisclosed location, probably a cave somewhere, and he gives us good news. He gives us good reports for the week. And the whole thing, the whole segment is good. It's just good news. Now I do something called branding points, but I go off the deep end. Okay. But he brings us good news. Now in that, he said tonight that here's synchronicity, that somebody went and I don't know if they were lost on an island or something to that effect or whatever, but they didn't have news for 30 days and they were so happy. Mm-hmm. And their health comes back to them. And I just got back from a 30-day trip to Glacier and Yellowstone and that, tuned out the news completely. That was pretty healthy and happiness going too. So I think there is something to that. So why is it? Is it just that we're always looking for the train wreck? But you say that's maybe not the normal. But you may be being programmed to look. Somebody's telling you. Somebody's feeding every time you get away from. In fact, I'll tell you another story. I had a brother one time who was alcoholic. I said I had a brother. He committed suicide later. Sad story. But he was an alcoholic, and when his friend found out that he was putting down alcohol, trying to get off it, he brought a 6-pack over. I couldn't believe it, man. I was going to kick the guy's ass. I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me, man?" And I think he partook. He was goaded into it. But that almost similarly seems what you're saying when you say that the cosmos is sending stuff in.
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry about your brother. I think that we got to watch out for that, because if we don't realize that we're looking at the same thing but seeing different things, then we're going to be tricked into thinking that you and I really disagree on stuff. And it's like the universe is goading us into an argument. And the more we can see that we're living in this virtual like reality, which is programmed to give us a reflection of our own internal beliefs, you and I can, I do this practice where, I'm not going to hide. You probably can tell that I come from a liberal state. I have, certain programming in my head about what my biases are. And I try and let those go, because I recognize that they're data that I just took in when I was a kid, but they don't reflect the wholeness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I listen to our current leaders and I hear them talk about what's going on. And I often agree. But then I switch my mindset, try to pull out of my bias and listen to the same words from the perspective of, what if this is the last leadership, if I was listening to them and I heard the same words coming out of their mouth, I would be like, oh, that's a problem. I'd be concerned. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's hard to see that it depends on what our perspective is on who's talking. We're going to form different opinions based upon what we believe to be the conditions or the context of the situation, regardless of what the words are. And I try to be really honest with myself and recognize that, I have a bias that's automatic. I can't help it. It just, comes from my training. But when I listen and I dialogue with people, I want to get down to what are we really experiencing right now? And what's the cause of our way of looking at things? And how do we see the similarities, see the commonalities between us?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one thing you can probably tell I'm from a red state. I mean, the cowboy hat right there tells you that. but so I know that there's intrinsic biases built in. I'm well aware of that. Sure. I do feel like I'm a paradigm buster, because if you go down my guest list, you won't see a common thread in that guest list. You'll see aliens, Bigfoot, political, religious.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Huh?
I appreciate that. Yeah.
So I mean, I take some flack for that. Say, how in the hell could you have that person on? Did you hear what they said? In fact, I have thought bubbles that occasionally pop up. When somebody says something outrageous, but sometimes I can say something outrageous too.
You. Yeah, sure.
So, but anyway, I do try to cross that bridge a little bit, and I say, hang on, people. Here's my thought, Sky, and I've told other guests, and the vast majority of the audience knows this, and that's what I told you earlier. I believe everyone has a little piece of truth, and you can't discard them if, say, their worldview is, let's just use a blue pie, but maybe there's a gold in there, a nugget, not red or blue, it's gold, because it's a gold nugget of truth. You need that truth, and if you dismiss that blue 99% circle, you're going to miss that nugget of truth that was designed, was put there deliberately so you can breach your borders,
yes,
pull aside a little bit, swallow your pride. And you said something earlier about you didn't have the answer. Well, I saw that as humility when you were saying, I don't have the answer. That's humility. Well, maybe humility would say, yeah, there's stuff you disagree with and you're going to vomit. But what if you get that little nugget of truth, the nugget of truth you got last week from the Elvis guy? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
All right. With that being said, we've got a number of questions coming in, and we're not going to get to all these, but let's go ahead and do a couple more. This is from Australia, Australian Ben. He says, Sky, is synchronicity the truth inside of numbers? Does synchronicity decipher the equation of life?
Well, I look for synchronicity as a guide, as a clue, and as a response to what I'm putting out there. So let me give an example of how the synchronicity can be a clue. Synchronicity can be a way in which situations unfold at a global scale that have some kind of overall meaning, and they're disconnected situations, right? So we have in the United States, we had this recent in August, we had a situation that I'll talk about, which is a supreme decision in the Texas courts to restrict abortion. Mm-hmm. And, some people are upset about that because it's limiting a person's right to choose. Mm-hmm. And we also had literally the same week, I believe, a decision or a mandate in California, to affecting people's right to choose in a different way about inoculation. And I think it's really important. These are different situations. I'm not saying they're equivalent or they can be compared directly, but they came up at the same time. We need to be looking at the whole field of information and saying, well, how does this thing, I feel really strongly about situation X for one reason. I feel really strongly about situation Y for a different reason. And realizing that people are both up in arms about kind of a similar thing. What's my rights? And seeing that we all have to carry this element of hypocrisy, I think. We agree with something when it matches our values, when it gets across our agenda. And that's just natural. That's who we are as human beings. So I think synchronicities can show up in the global marketplace for us to see ourselves more clearly and recognize that we have some inconsistencies with the way that we think about the world. And the more we can open ourselves to other mindsets, to recognize, to listen to other people's mindsets or listen to the situations with the intention of expanding our view, not being so limited in our perspectives. I think that's what synchronicity can really help us do.
Okay. This is from Tough Long Coat. It says, do you have a study on the third eye, and can that explain your experience?
So I do theoretical research. I don't study any kind of experimental data. I would say, I think when you talk about the third eye, I guess you're talking about maybe intuition, having, sort of direct insight into what's happening. And I think this is what flow is about. This is where my first book, Living in Flow, talks about when you deal with synchronicity effectively, when you can pay attention to the obstacles, and like in this case with my house, where the obstacle is that the contractor is unwilling to give me the permit to move on. Well, I can see that as a point of contention where I'm going to argue and fight and take him to court, or I can see it as part of a synchronicity. And my intuition says, well, what does he really need from me? Oh, okay. Yeah, he told me what he needs is for me to give him, some confirmation that I won't take him to court. Great, I can do that. I can let go of my pride, and I can do that. So I think synchronicities, they when we follow our intuition and we get in touch with what we're afraid of and start to let that go, we start to be more happy, more connected to people, and those barriers start to come down, and we experience more synchronicity and flow.
So you're saying that you can actually experience more synchronicity if you begin to recognize it?
Yeah, I think you have to recognize that everything is kind of synchronistic, even the obstacles.
Would you say this interview tonight is synchronistic?
Yeah, it shows up in my life at a good time. Where I'm happy to talk to you about some kind of interesting topics, and I've got this event coming up that you just showed a minute ago with Neil Donald Walsh.
Yeah, tell us about that. What's going on with that?
So, Conversations with God is a book that he wrote 20 years ago that I was deeply influenced by. Helped me gain a more compassionate view of myself, on my spiritual path, and then recently, back in August, synchronistically, a gentleman named Peter Lucas and Lena Vasquez. I'm part of a program that, working with them, and they've worked with Neil Donald Walsh, and they brought us together in this webinar on October 28th to talk about metaphysics and science.
All right. Well, those are definitely two topics I like to talk about.
Folks.
And synchronicity. So we're talking about two worldview perspectives. Now, and you mentioned intuition. Now, here's a world where somebody needs to bring two categories together. Women have intuition and men have hunches. Can we merge these two, Sky, so that they can both understand and process?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's the same thing, really, right? Women and men are a great example of just two different backgrounds, two different contexts, two different sets of conditions that make us who we are, probably. And everybody comes with different conditions, but we're raised inside a culture where we have different, as men or women, we have different sort of senses of the world. And just as if we're black and white, we have different senses of the world, or if we're, Australian or American, we have different senses of the world. And so it's another example of how starting from a listening with the intent of really changing our minds, are we really willing to change our mind and look through a different lens? When we look at a hologram, we see a perspective, right? That's like putting a lens on a situation. We're always looking through a lens. Can we take away that lens and look through a different lens and see things the way somebody else sees? And when we do that, I think of the wholeness as this whole field of possibilities around us. Oftentimes we're just stuck in our mindset, our way of looking at things. But when we can, see the solutions that come from the whole rather than from where we thought they were going to come from, then that's where synchronicity shows up. If I need to get to the airport and I think my friend's going to take me, and the day before he gets sick and says, I can't take you, I can say, you're a flake, or I can start looking around and saying, well, where else is in the wholeness is the solution going to come from? My neighbor might show up. I might have the flight canceled. Might be able to take an Uber. And the solutions come from unexpected places.
Yeah, and there are, even in 9/11, I don't want to talk about conspiracies, but on the synchronistic part, I believe there were people saying that either they got a call not to show up or they felt like they shouldn't show up. And then, of course, there's all kinds of stories about people, they were going to get on a plane, but something interrupted their path, and they didn't, and then the plane crashed. There's a lot of stories like that. So there is something out there that is on operation. All right, here's a question from our moderator, Jade. She wants to get in on this conversation as well. It says, Sky, can synchronicity be described as both positive and negative?
For sure. I think of it as neutral. So I described synchronicities earlier where I was coming from a place of fear with the contractor, like I'm worried about what's going to happen. And I was also not taking responsibility. I wasn't giving very clear instructions. And that led to a negative synchronicity where a mistake was made that really impacted me for a lot of months. So when we approach the world from a egotistical stance or a not self-aware stance, not sure exactly what we're feeling, we're just sort of broadcasting our anger or our fear out in the world, we're going to create situations for ourselves which synchronistically, our car breaks down, or someone comes across our path and we get fired from our job because we get in an argument with our boss or whatever. Situation is going to show up to taunt us and make it hard, and our state of mind is going to get the better of us. But when we're in a state where we're more receptive, more open, and I think willing to stay in uncertainty, that's where we experience more of the positive synchronicities. In the unknown.
Well, who's ever doing that, Sky, that's trying to keep us separated and keep us from advancing and
they're doing a pretty good job.
And they continue to bait us. I just had a random thought come way out of the past, back from the Moody Blues, where they said, it riles them to believe that you perceive the web they weave. Keep on thinking free. So if I perceive I am trapped in this wave due to my the prognosticators of the Moody Blues, then if I know I'm in that web, then I'm going to fight my way out. I think it's even worse if we don't know we're in that web or that we are even being baited, because it makes a cowboy mad to think somebody's trying to trick me into having this angst against another human person who happens to have a different belief than I do.
Well, I think the trick is we're always in the web. And yes, it's better to know that you're in the web. And we're not in the web when we start to sit with openness and uncertainty and allow that to be true. It's so easy to get certain. Yeah, we're in the matrix there. Exactly. And I think it's really valuable, at least for me, to pull away from the notion that somebody is responsible, that somebody is trying to control us or make us confused, trying to make us argue with each other. I think it is the purpose of the programming that you're seeing dripping down the screen there to send us situations that reflect our own beliefs, and our own beliefs are limited, right? We have a partial view of the world where they're always limited. And the more we get caught up in our reactions, our anger and our fear to things that happen, the more we just empower those negative synchronicities to keep happening. We read articles that trigger us a certain way. We find newscasts, we talk to people on the street, and we just learn more and more about what's wrong in the world. But that's because we're allowing ourselves to be brought into that mindset, because that's not because somebody out there is doing it, but because the cosmos itself is built to send us that information at that time.
In the King James Bible, 1 Corinthians 13:12 says, "For we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face, for I know in part, but then I shall know even as I am known." Those are definitely words of wisdom. But if we know that we are seeing through this glass darkly, it seems like we can either make that glass even darker, or we can maybe shine it up a little bit as we go. When I talk about that blue pie with the gold nugget, maybe we can brush a little spot to see a little bit through. But it sounds like life's experience dictates that we're going to be struggling to advance to sort of see clearly. But if we know that we can't see through the glass clearly, should we then be so dogmatic to persuade somebody to the point of anger, I suppose, and separation even, because they won't agree with my point of view? If you know that you're looking through the glass darkly, then you really shouldn't be doing that.
Right. Why would you persuade someone of your point of view if you know that your point of view is already limited, right? I think that's a really, really useful point. It's not that your point of view is wrong. I want to get clear. Like, you have great points. I have great points. We have great data, but it's always a partial story. And I think the cosmos that we live in is so rich and complex that it can actually support multiple different versions of reality that we have. And if we try and argue over the one version of reality, we're just buying into that confusion, the confusion world. And I think that, I'll leave it there.
Okay. Well, let's just leave it there with this next question. Oh, by the way, let me add a few more people join us in the live chat. You probably didn't hear the shout out that I give them, but Jim Tedesco, welcome to the program. Teflon Code has joined us in the live chat. Kat Sorelli, Constant Companion, of course, Jay, the moderator, Australian Ben, Max Vogan, and King's Bride all joining us in the live chats, both on the website and on our YouTube channel. All right. Sky from Teflon Code says, so how do you kick out the negative synchronicities and bring on the positives?
Well, this is kind of like your last question, ties into something I wanted to say, which is the desire that we have to be right, the desire that we have to be certain. It leads us to stay in a place of, the negative emotions. It's really a challenge to listen to what somebody says when they're critiquing you. For instance, take just a relationship with someone in your life that you care about. When they come at you with a critique, there's a tendency to want to defend. When my wife talks to me about something, I want to defend myself. I want to make myself look good because it's vulnerable. And I think what we're being drawn to do is be more vulnerable in the world and be willing to sit with that uncertainty. And when we can do that, we can actually expand to bigger filters, bigger views of the world. But it's not something everybody wants to do, right? Because when we feel that uncertainty, it might involve shame, it might involve fear, and nobody wants to feel those things. And we're taught that feeling fear and shame are bad, so you got to defend it. You got to get out of that as quickly as possible. And in fact, maybe they are the invitation to a better world. When we allow ourselves to feel those things and respond with someone, we've all had the experience where somebody criticizes us. We don't defend ourselves. We open ourselves a little bit, and then the relationship gets tighter, right? That's how we form relationships. Well, the science of holograms is all about relationships. There's nothing in the photo itself other than just the relationships between all the frequencies. And when you look at it from a particular stance, you see a particular set of relationships and you see the city image from a certain perspective. So I think the physics is all about relationships.
Let me give you an example of synchronicity. I didn't write these down, but one comes to mind, and some of the long-term viewers have heard this, but you haven't. But so I'm on a road trip and I'm talking to the wife and I'm telling her how much vinyl is so much better than an MP3 file. I said, the clicks and pops aside, you get so much ambience with vinyl records. And I said, and two of my favorite all-time records was albums was CCR and Sgt. Pepper's album. And I said, you can't listen to that on a damn MP3 player and hear what that music is. It won't play. It's cut and it's white. It's stale. But when you listen to it on vinyl, then you get the full effect. So we walk into a gas station. Right in front of us is a stand with albums. First album was CCR, and the second album was Sgt. Pepper.
That's amazing.
I could not even believe it. I said, Susan, you're not going to believe this right here. What are albums doing at a gas station, let alone those two back to back? Right. But anyway,
it was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. They've been going in and out of style. Guaranteed you raise a smile.
Let me introduce to you.
It's
going up.
The band you know for all these years. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yeah.
Cheers.
Oh, one of the best albums of all time.
No doubt. They don't make them like that. All right. Another question for you. Ooh, that was synchronicity. Have you found any glitches in the Matrix?
Oh, yeah. I love that question. Like the black cat, Deja vu, I guess. In the Matrix, it's deja vu, when the glitch happens. So I think that the idea of a multiverse is useful, where you have a tree that's branching into many different possible states. And I think there are decision points that we make, and we don't always realize we're at a decision point. Elections are that way. Every election, we choose somebody to go take us one direction or another. But there's also personal states, decisions where we decide to take a job or leave a job, decide to, I look at situations where I have an opportunity, like let's say I remember this time where I had a job opportunity and I was waiting. I submitted my paperwork and I was waiting to hear back from them. And I recognized that in this period of time, it was like a week that I had to hear back from them. I had a choice. I was either going to just sit there and wait, maybe check my email every 20 minutes, or I was going to actually like learn about the job and start to do some research and try and educate myself. And I knew that that was a harder path, but I decided to do that. And for me, the purpose of that is to put myself on a path of this branching multiverse where I get the job, because I'm investing myself without any kind of promise of payback, investing myself in the direction I want to go. Now, of course, the people with my paperwork have no idea that I'm doing that. It can't affect them directly, but synchronistically, I think it's putting my feet where my mouth is and moving myself in a meaningful direction. So I think that the glitches in the matrix are those moments when we have real choices, and the choice, the branching point may be next week, but the choice right now of how we prepare ourselves is really the key element of how we get one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. I see in the live chat, Australian Ben said, you're right. Innocence is vulnerable and it's also pure. And when you said that, I thought it sounds like being vulnerable may be something that we maybe not need to shy away from. That is, right. It's more of an attribute of strength rather than a weakness. And then I thought about
right.
I thought about the scene in John Wick where John Wick goes into a bar and he's talking to the waitress and she goes, "I never seen you like that." And he says, "Like what?" And she goes, "Vulnerable."
Yeah, well, that's a great synchronicity, because I told you the first step of my 4 steps to wholeness. The first is listening with the intent of like being changed. Mm-hmm. The second, I didn't tell you, which is remaining sincere, being innocent. Because when we think we're right, we're not really being sincere. We've got an agenda. Mm-hmm. Maybe we're arrogant, we think we're right. And if you remain sincere with a sincere desire to learn, as an innocent kid, to just, I want to understand this better. I want to understand who you are, even though you seem to be totally different from me. I want to understand. That brings us back to the stance of listening. Even, it's really hard to listen when somebody says something that really gets us upset. Mm-hmm. Those are the places in our culture, in a world right now, where we can make a big difference by not getting upset and maintaining innocence, coming back to listening, and then looking for the synchronicity in the story that allows us to come into more common view.
Mm. Well said. Well said. Question says, Sky, do angels have control over these synchronicities?
I don't know what angels are, so I don't have an answer for that. But I respect, any perspective that has a sense of there being an underlying meaning, there being an underlying purpose to our work here. And I think ultimately, whether it's angels or science or what I call meaningful history selection, this process of the actions we take having a meaning and selecting out the more meaningful paths on the multiverse. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's for the purpose of growing and healing. And I think it's healing work that we're trying to do on the planet right now. There's, it seems like everything's falling apart for no reason. And I think it's falling apart for a very good reason, because there are a lot of things that we haven't healed. There's a lot of wounds from history, a lot of ways that we are with each other that are not very kind or understanding, a lot of different people in the world with different perspectives. And if we want to create a culture that, moves into the future with more, joy and happiness, we're going to have these conversations, kind of like the ones we're having right now, that get to a deeper level of mutual understanding without feeling like we have to somehow see things the same way. Because we don't. We're looking at the hologram from different angles.
Well, as a movie quote machine that I appear to be tonight, in the movie Prometheus, the android was being questioned about why the alien forms were wanting to terraform the Earth or destroy it. And he said, in order to build, one must first destroy. So is it that we have to destroy everything? Should I say, can't we just build back better? I can't believe it came out.
I heard that. You said it.
I can't believe it. Oh, man.
I'm not going to press you on that. Okay.
But I'm just saying, does one have to destroy? Can't we just, I guess tinkering around really doesn't do much either. I guess. Yeah. I don't know.
Because our egos are what's in the way. you have, and I have, and everybody listening has a mindset, a framework in our minds that we were raised to have that is incomplete. I mean, I know that it is incomplete because we look at the world from a partial view, but it feels like it's the whole thing. And that's the way feelings work. They reinforce our sense of certainty to make us feel like I need to understand this.
Speaking of Schrodinger's cat thought experiment, I'm going to very gently talk to somebody in the live chat. The King's Bride. Please, this is not meant in any bad way at all. I want to use this as a test, as a little test here. Okay, a quote in the live chat says that the Beatles were all Freemasons. That to me has a negative connotations. A Freemason sounds like a dastardly dude with some alternative plans to who knows what. We kind of, on the other hand, whatever, we're singing a song, okay, of the supposed Freemasons. So I'm wondering, in camps, it's only because there's camps here. So I can see, and their opinion is 100% valid, like you said. How would we, King's Bride, how could we meet somewhere? That's a kind of a test thing right there. Right. Between great music, best album, selling album of all time, the best artist ever, to they're going to get you because they had some kind of sinister plan. That's so far away from that. I mean, I can see you. That's
a great question.
I can see Yoko Ono. I can see you. I'm just throwing her name out because I heard her this week. She was screaming. But anyway, I can see that but King's Bride, is there any way we can bring you a little closer? And then I guess let's bring it closer
in this way. Like, what's interesting to me is that came up right now in our conversation. It's not really about them, the Beatles.
Okay.
This right now is about us and the caller. That what's important is if I didn't know that. Okay, so I'm coming from an innocent stance of like singing a song that I was given when I was a kid, not because I'm a Freemason. I actually don't even have an understanding of the politics and the background of that. And so what's important is that as a relationship between you and me and the listener, that there isn't a sense of a deeper connotation or a deeper distrust that needs to develop, that I've got some agenda, because I don't have an agenda in singing that song. And so helping ourselves to have some spaciousness in our interpretations of things, I think that's what we're after, so we don't read into them.
Okay, so conversely though, to us, okay, I didn't mean to call that viewer out. I mean, I love them. I love everyone. I mean, we got the best chat ever, Sky. I got to tell you, there's so much love that flows
Great
through
questions
there. But to us, okay, we got to come back that way, right? Because I
view that way.
Well, okay, so I, in my opinion, my humble opinion, the Beatles is probably the most dynamic original group ever. Just my opinion. But don't I have to move? We're talking about clashing of worldviews and dogmatic opinions, and so from a humility standpoint, I gotta say, okay, so I said they're this. The viewer says they're that. I said, can we move them this way? But then we have to move that way.
Absolutely.
So how would we move that way? Acknowledging that, or say, let me research that. I mean, would that be acceptable for movement on our part or my part?
The nice thing is I don't think it involves us having to research, because we're going to come up with whatever data we come up with. And it doesn't actually influence the story of who you and I are. The story of who you and I are is how we really feel right now, what our real intentions are with each other. And that's what's important. So I really appreciate the listener bringing this up, because these are the kinds of things where instead of trying to come to alignment, we're looking at the hologram from different views, right? There's data. We could look up the data and find out whether they really were Freemasons or not. I trust the listener that they know what they're talking about. And does that change the conversation? Because I think that I look at synchronicity as the guide for me, not whether these people or those people are out there to change the world or hurt me, but how is synchronicity showing up in my life to help me learn and grow? And I'm always going to look to that. I'm not going to get caught up in the details of the facts on the street, because those facts are going to look different for different people. Okay.
All right. Gio says, Sky, does synchronicity mean everything happens for a reason?
Well, I think everything happens within a context of purpose. So, and the purpose either comes from inside of us, or it comes from some So if we don't have a purpose, if we don't take initiative in our lives, then the purpose sort of happens to us. The purpose is to learn and grow and heal ourselves, become more complete human beings and more complete society of human beings. And I don't have a statement of what that really means, but I know that it has something to do with being more vulnerable, being more open to each other, having more fun together, more enjoyment. And that comes from a certain sense of openness. So I think that one of the ways to have more of that and to have everything be a synchronicity is to intentionally try and put yourself in difficult situations. Push yourself to the fourth step of the wholeness. I talked about listening. I talked about being sincere. Talked about looking to the whole for synchronicity. And the fourth step is taking bold action. When you take bold action, then you're seeding the cosmos to bring you synchronicity. But the synchronicity is going to reflect what you chose to do. It's not going to be just a random thing that's getting you along your path. If you choose your path, then you're going to experience synchronicities which support that path.
Another question says, I recently, I guess it's moved in my house. My new home street number turns out to be 4 digits that when added equals my birthday. So my address is my birthday, but it didn't occur to me either. Is that a synchronicity?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great one. I like that. Our address is my daughter's birth year. So, we didn't rent the house because of that. But when we moved in or we were thinking of signing the paperwork, it's like, yeah, that's great. I love it. So, I think with numbers, I think we're always being given little clues or little reflections. I don't think it's a question of whether something is or isn't synchronicity. I think it's a question of, the first line of Living in Flow says, I hope that after reading this book, you'll never have the urge to say, that was so weird. Because the universe is made to reflect the choices we're making. It's made to bring us weird situations. So the more we can live with that in mind, then we start to make choices that, with that in mind, we start to take more risks. We start to go for things that we wouldn't go for otherwise. Maybe leave our job and try and build our own business, or take a stance in life and try and correct some of the big problems we have, like injustice. And I think racial injustice is a big issue. I think climate change is a big issue. I think polarization is a big issue. I think women's rights and the inequity of different, the way we run finance is a big issue. There's lots of big issues, and immigration is a big issue. When we take these things on with a mind for synchronicity, we start to be more receptive to the solutions that emerge and less attached to our own particular perspective.
I know you're drinking out of a mason jar.
Am I? Yeah.
We don't know what's in there.
See that.
But it's clear. It's clear. Nobody knows what I drink. Okay. You would assume, see, the mind would assume this is coffee. I never reveal what it is. But so there are opposing viewpoints that we have. And I think it is a strength if we can just sort of listen twice and speak once. I think that might be a good thing.
I like that.
So, all right. So
I like that the mason jar has come up because it's an example of synchronicity where this topic comes up multiple times, and it gives us something to look at and say, these are conversations we have to have, right? Instead of having the stance that this is a positive or negative thing, how does it allow us to have a deeper conversation about our beliefs and what the universe is trying to tell us? I think it's trying to push us into deeper conversations. And the more we can do that.
I was going for a little bit of a reach because I'm a beekeeper. And so, of course, we put our honey in mason jars. And so I'm thinking, oh, no, that's not synchronicity, man. The guy's just drinking out of a mason jar. People do that, especially down in Kentucky. So I don't know they even allow it. Are you on the I was going to say left coast. Where are you at?
Left coast, yeah. California, Northern California.
See, right there. So I didn't even know they allow you guys to drink out of a mason jar over there, man. Are you going to get arrested or what? You crossing party lines? What's going on, Sky?
Well, to be honest, I don't know about the politics of the Freemasons. I mean, I've heard it before, but it kind of goes in one ear and out the other because I'm looking for the real human connection. That's what's more important.
Wait. So no, that's it. We're talking about Freemason, mason jars. and the honey goes in him. So, I mean, there's 3 Masons right there. By the way, a Mason is somebody who wears a funny skirt and does like a little dance or something. I don't know what they do, but
anyway. And it's a career also. It was one of the Masonry, but it's got a long history. And there's, like I said, when we talk about the history of our culture, and we look to understand history through a lens of who's got an agenda for what. There's definitely people that have an agenda, right? You look at climate change right now. I think climate change, I've got reasons I would say it's a very big issue, but I understand that there's a lot of people trying to make money off climate change and trying to push an agenda that benefits them. I think that's a big problem. So I think it's the natural way that we've lived our lives. We have agendas, and people take advantage of that. What's more important to me is that we understand that. Let me give an example of how synchronicity sort of illustrates a bigger picture to things, not just what's going on right in the moment. But when we talk about the situation with the pathogen that's happening right now. So in 2019, I was touring for my new book, Living in Flow. And I was with my daughter. We were traveling. And I went into a bookstore and I found this book called The Dog Who Saved the World. And it's by Ross Welford. And I just found this book as something my daughter and I could read on vacation. And it turns out it was about a situation with a pathogen that happened. I had never really thought about this idea. And it was about a time machine, and they solved the problem through a time machine and this dog. And it's a cute story, but it brought to my mind this whole question: why are we talking about this pathogen? And then just a few months later, in 2020, in February, at Valentine's Day, I went to the movies. We don't usually go to the movies. We just went to the one that was playing. It was called Parasite. It's this movie not about that. It was about racial relations or class relations, class warfare. And I didn't really like the movie, but it won like 10 Oscars. So it caught my attention. Like, okay, I didn't like this movie, but then it won 10 Oscars. Why is that? Why is this a meme? So I'm looking at these memes showing up in the world. And then just a few weeks later is when the lockdowns happened. So to me, instead of looking at the lockdowns as this nefarious plot against humanity, I'm looking at it and saying, yeah, there might be a plot, but it's coming from the cosmos, right? It's because there's this meme that showed up in my life 9 months ago, and again last month, that's much bigger than any one person. So I think that synchronicity is bringing us information into our lives, which is showing us where we're going. And it's not because somebody's doing it to us. It's because the world itself is trying to lead us on a journey, a quest that we have to navigate. And so for me, it's really helpful to not pinpoint it on a nefarious plot by humans, but really something that's much bigger and broader with really an ultimate positive goal of healing for us.
There is a movie out there where a dog does save the world. It's called Equilibrium. Do you ever see that?
No, I'm going to write it down.
Okay. Well, it's about a world in the future to where, and this kind of ties into the pathogen in just a way, but everybody has to take a daily dose. They have to take their daily dose. And so there's these clerics that got to go out and find people that haven't taken their daily dose. And what the dose does is it suppresses human emotions, because the system determined that emotions is what's causing anger and hate and wars. And so if they could drug it out with a daily dose, then you won't have those emotions. Well, they found out people weren't taking those doses, and they were feeling, they would see a picture and they would cry or something, see a sunset. They weren't taking a dose. So this cleric who's in charge of going and killing these people, he went to this place where there's this little puppy dog, and they were going to kill it because the puppy dog invokes the emotion of like puppy love, right? Yeah, and so he holds the dog up and he's getting ready to send it off to get it killed. And that little dog looks at him and licks his face, and he goes, I got to take this dog in for inspection. I'll take it in personally. And that was the moment that he changed from killing people who had emotions when he had an emotion himself for that little puppy dog. So in that movie, the puppy dog saved the world.
Yeah, that's great.
Just throwing it out there.
Well, and I think that emotions are the driver of synchronicity. Like I talked about earlier about when we anticipate a circumstance, when we anticipate feeling a certain way, we start to bring in, we align with those future branches of the multiverse, which have that experience. And so I think and I'm not the first one. This has been there's a Catholic cleric from the 1500s or something that has a quote. I forget his name, but that there's something inside of us that when we feel deeply, the world responds to it. And so I think emotions are a big part of this. And that's why becoming more aware of our anger and our shame and our filters are a really important part of having these dialogues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Speaking of that, as far as a turn for the worse of humankind, every once in a while there's some egregious criminal act where they'll show a video of maybe somebody just going up and hitting somebody right in the head, and they say it as if the person had no emotion, they had no soul, they had, there was something missing completely out of their life to where they would do that, and maybe even laugh about it. Of course, video it, put it up on Facebook, live stream it. Is there any hope for synchronicity to bring them back to some semblance of humanity, or are those type of cases lost causes?
I don't know. I think that where synchronicity is valuable for right now for us to make a difference is in our personal lives. We look at, in our daily life where we're making choices, and do we see ourselves in that? Where are the times when we are insensitive to somebody else's needs? When we hear what they say and we just write it off as crazy. I think we all have elements of that, and synchronicities can be helpful in those moments where we choose either to be more empathic with each other or to be more resistant and closed down. So I don't look at the hardest questions like why do wars happen, and why do people get killed unfairly. I think bad things happen to good people. I don't think synchronicity can explain all that, but I look at the easier questions, like when I'm deciding whether to take the train to, go to my job interview, what's the likelihood of me catching that train? Well, it depends on a number of factors, a lot of which has to do on my mindset and on the choices I make.
So
synchronicity can help.
But if you don't catch that train, then would you say that, wow, my life path just changed? Are you to that level to where when those changes happen that you say, well, great, there's a new path just got laid out for me? Or do you say, wow, I'm going to be late?
I always look at things from the perspective of what path is laid out for me. And I don't think that there's a right path or the wrong path, but I think that there is a tendency to, there are paths that are the ones we were really meant for, the ones that are, bring us to more wholeness. And there's the paths that bring us to more relearning the lessons we've already tried to learn. I think that's really what it's about. And I think the idea of a virtual reality is helpful as we go through on our quest of understanding ourselves. Sometimes we have to repeat lessons, repeat experiences because we haven't learned the lesson. We're still at the same level in the game, right? But when we figure that out, we get to the next level and we stop having that same experience showing up in our life. It could be a marriage. We have the same difficulties in marriage. We leave that marriage, we go to another marriage, and we have the same difficulties. But once we figure out what we're doing, how we're part of that problem, then we stop recreating that for ourselves.
What percentage would you consider our lives being affected by these synchronicities?
Well, I think the more that we pay attention, we can positively reinforce it and use it for our good. I think when we don't pay attention, you look at what happens in politics, and I think it's just a huge reflection of many different synchronicities that happen that are negative and create division. And so when we're not really paying attention to these things, we just get caught up in the game and we're being played against each other by the cosmos. So
Sky, do you consider yourself a bridge builder?
I'd like to be, yeah. And the way I try and build bridges is by coming from empathy, trying to get out of my head. Like I disagree with people all the time on the surface, but I know how to let go of my values for just a moment, long enough to understand that somebody else's values may also be valid. And then, maybe come around to seeing that, oh yeah, our values don't actually contradict each other, but it takes time. It takes mental effort to get out of my original stance and take, a broader view.
Okay. Let's get to another question here. It says, could synchronicity, this is from Rose, says, Sky, could synchronicity really be possible when I believe people are being controlled by the matrix or artificial intelligence? For example, Ray Kurzweil in The Singularity, aka transhumanism.
Yeah. Well, I think that, my stance, and this is just my stance, it doesn't have to be your stance, is that we are in a matrix which is responsive to us. So we experience things which feel like we're being controlled, right? Because we get that the cat walking across our path just at that moment when we're thinking about a cat, makes us feel like there's a purpose to everything. And it reinforces our sense that we're on the right path or the wrong path, or it makes us afraid or whatever. But ultimately what it comes down to is the choices that we ourselves make, and that the universe is neutral. And it's those choices along the path that determine whether we go left or right in the matrix. And speaking about the matrix, when Neo is walking down a hallway and he makes the choice to go one way or the other, the agents, which are the nefarious, counter beings, they're just role-playing games. They're what do they call non-player characters, NPCs. They can recalculate and adjust their history. So if he goes left, they can adjust their history to be on the left side. If he goes right, they can adjust their history to be on the right side. This is the essence of a virtual reality game, is the history of everything in the game can adjust to match the player's choices. And this is how I think the world is really operating. It's adjusting to match our choices. So even if you're in a matrix where there's a lot of meaning happening and it feels like you're out of control, it's really our own choices that direct how the matrix unfolds.
Have you ever seen the movie Coherence?
No, it sounds good.
Write it down. It's mandatory viewing. You got 2 mandatory viewings going on there. You didn't know this was going to be an assignment interview.
Yeah, well, I like movies, so.
Oh, you'll love this one here. This is just up your alley. Okay, and in Coherence, the movie, I believe it's on Netflix actually. A comet comes by, and then it zaps the power out of this neighborhood where this group of 8 people are having a dinner, and their power goes out. And then it's all black all down the street. Everything's all black. And they start talking about this comet, what it did. And somebody said, well, hey, there's a house at the end of the block with a light on. And so they sent a couple people down there to check it out so they could use the phone because the phones were dead. Well, when they got there, it was a house they left. And it was them in a different setting. And there were different people that were in love, were not in love, other people that were nice to each other were arguing. And they came back and they went back out again, and a completely different, they found the same house, and it's completely, so it was like multi-universes. And it's really exciting because you got to watch the movie. As you watch the movie, you'll see things different in places. Well, this is in this house and that's in that house. And if you really pay attention, you see the changes, but it shows the dynamic of this sort of holographic universe that all things are maybe happening at the same time. You just happen to be in the hologram that you're in. But right now, I mean, you could be wearing a cowboy hat in one of these. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I'm wearing my cowboy shirt.
which by the way, look, you had to be pretty bold. Now, when you saw the Cosmic Cowboy, you saw the hat. You saw, who's this crank? And you thought, oh crap, man, I got to do it. Did you had trepidation, Sky, or do you say, I'm going to cross the border here. I'm going to reach out. Did you have that kind of feeling, or was it just like, okay?
It was kind of like, okay, because you and I have a lot in common, we might have different views, different stances, different backgrounds, different frameworks, but I try and let go of those frameworks and see that we both have the intention to make the world a better place. We do that through analyzing things at a deep level, and it pays to have our analyses be compared so that we can actually come to a bigger story together, merge these different stories into one broader story. That's how people change.
I think people need also to see examples. I mean, where's the leader on the right who's talking to the leader on the left in these diametrically opposed points of views?
Right.
Where is the leaders to show us that you can do it and not maybe give up your core principles, but you can...
Right.
Where are they? Where's the great philosophers, the change makers, or is it that the change?
Here's the thing. I think we are human beings are able to be triggered. We're able to be convinced of things pretty easily. And even if we're pretty defended against that, things are happening right now that are so in our face because the internet is right there and things are happening quickly. Social media is, in our face. It's very challenging to not be swayed off of the center line, to not go into a camp, And I think what we need are people that have an ability to stay in the center line and not get swayed into one camp or the other. It doesn't mean that you don't have values. It doesn't mean that you don't hold to a set of principles that you were born into the world with, but you do so in a way that has room for other people's values as well. And then you try and show through through self, through example, what it's like to hold different points of view at the same time and not sort of collapse into like, it's got to be my way.
My way.
I think we need leaders like that.
Well, I mean, and again, to your point kind of earlier, let the change begin in me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of, okay. I mean, there's some truth, let the change begin in me. I'll do my part. But no, you're right. I agree. We're 100% agreed on this here, that we're in our certain way, or in this video, in this live presentation, we are showing, I think people can get what side I'm kind of gravitated on. You pretty much delineated your side. I didn't hit the off button, stop streaming, right. And you didn't say, wait a minute, I think my battery's done, Daniel. My battery's done. I'll still catch you later. You didn't do that. Right. We remained on the line with civility.
Yeah.
And it can be done, Sky.
I know it can be, and we're doing it. And I appreciate that about you. And I knew that going into this conversation. I think that I really want to learn about the perspectives that people have. And I want to learn about my own perspective, how it's limited. And I think that's what, that's my value, is I want to learn about what's limited in myself. Mm-hmm. And I think you have that value as well. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking for different perspectives, and that willingness, I think, sets the path for people.
Mm-hmm. So if we recognize, then let's just say that some folks are contemplating life events, and like I always say, decisions we're always at this why, go here or go there, left or right, talk about the road, not politically, but, buy this product or not, go this store or not, these whys are constantly there. So is it that once we begin to say, well, gee, I remember last week I was going to go to the store, but I decided to go, or I had a flat tire and then I had to go to visit somebody. I had to go to a different store where I met a person. If a person recognized, what I'm trying to say, if a person recognized that there was a synchronistic event, then could they build upon it just by being aware of it, or are they going to happen on their own?
Well, I think that every choice that we make, we can look back and say, what if I had just gone the other way? What if I had just gone to the gym instead of to the store? And what my understanding of how synchronicity works is it has to do with this thing I said earlier at the very beginning. Quantum mechanics is really the study of what the world is doing when you're not watching it. When you're not watching it, you tend to think that the world is happening independently of you. But there's this thing called relational quantum mechanics, and it's a conclusion that I draw from my own research, that not only is quantum mechanics applicable to systems in the particles, but also to the system as a whole, part of the wholeness research that I do. And it's a debatable fact, or a debatable point, but I argue that point. And what it means is that everything around you that you're not witnessing, you're not observing, is open, is uncertain, undetermined, not just for you, but actually in a sort of metaphysical way. Mm-hmm. And so when you go to the gym and you run into a friend and you ask, what if I had never gone to the gym that day, if I had gone to the store instead? Well, you could have run into that friend at the store too, because their path could have been retroactively kind of adjusted to be in a different place in order for you to have that meeting. So the short version is that no matter what you choose, the universe can adjust, just like that virtual reality can adjust in the matrix, to bring you a situation that you need to experience. You don't really need to worry about whether you're going to get on your path. Just make good decisions, to challenge yourself, and you'll be on your path. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the Bible says that thy word is a light into my pathway, a lamp into my path and my walkway. But that tells me that there are little lights on our path. It's right there in the good book. But let me tell you about a synchronistic event. So, as I said earlier, we took a month off. We went to Rushmore, Custer, Glacier, Bridger, Teton, Yellowstones, and the Snowy Mountain Range, people. If you haven't been there, it's the most underrated place ever. And by the way, that Snowy Mountain Range coming through Wyoming was way higher than Glacier. It was at 11,000 feet, man. I didn't know how my truck pulled my trailer up there, but it did. Anyway, that's another story. So
trailer looks nice, by the way. I saw the pictures.
Oh yeah, well, good. So you may, I don't know, I think I put the story in there, but in case you didn't read it, this definitely synchronicity. So So I'm playing Hotel Cal. I'm a guitar player. You seen that by my hat guitar? That is actually my guitar in the background there.
That's nice.
Let me get out of here there so you can see. Oh, there it is. Takamine.
That's nice. What kind is it? A Gibson?
It's a Takamine.
Oh, Takamine.
Yeah, cool. Takamine, Takayu, Takadem.
I don't actually know.
Okay, well, anyway. So I'm playing Hotel California. I'm real happy at the campground.
Yeah. On a dark desert highway.
Cool wind through my hair. Here we go again. Smell of colitis rising up through the air. So I'm playing. Next thing you know, somebody in a golf cart comes. It's the counter guy from the office. He says, "Mr. Otto, we've got several complaints on loud music." I'm thinking, well, it's daylight, it's an acoustic, and it's not amplified. I mean, what are you talking? You know, there are rules. Right. And so anyway, I said, okay, no problem. I'll just quit playing. But he goes back to the office, and I told the wife, I said, man, you know, I really feel bad. I did something that caused this guy to have to answer calls. You know, who wants that call? Hey, we got campsite number 15, you know, party poopers. Anyway, right. So I can't help it. They can't enjoy life. It's not my problem. I don't have that problem. So anyway, I felt bad. I said, well, let's go down and talk to him. I didn't mean for him to get involved. I mean, I don't care about these other people. And so we went down there, and I said, you know, I'm sorry that happened, that you had to leave your post and come and tell me. And I said, tell you what, we'll be right back. So came right back, and we gave the guy a jar of honey, and which we normally take with us. In fact, we always have a jar of honey with us, and we pray and we say, okay, God, show us who on our trip gets this jar of honey. It's just something we've done for a while. You know,
I like that.
Synchronistic opportunity, whatever, divine appointment, whatever you want to call it. And when you have an intention like that, it happens. And this was one of those times. So he goes, it's so interesting because while I was taking the call, a camper came in who was a beekeeper and gave me a honey straw. He said, and then you come up here and give me a jar of honey. And he was from Jamaica, and he told me the story that in Jamaica, their lore is if a honeybee comes into your house, good things are going to happen. And he thought, he was talking out loud. He gave me honey sticks, and you gave me honey. He's beekeeper, and you're beekeeper. And he started breaking down. He felt like he was getting the message right then. And so I had to figure that was a synchronistic event. If we had not given him the honey, why was this guy a beekeeper? Why would two beekeepers be involved? Other than the fact that there was some convergence or coherence, should I say, in his life, and it really affected him.
I thought you were going to say that he basically sang to you at the campground. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
Oh, that's too funny.
But I think that we never know when we're going to show up in somebody's life to affect them, and that's where I think it's really valuable. If you want to live in more synchronicity and flow, you follow your intuition, your third eye, whatever you want to call it, and you show up. You say the things that you are called to say to people, because you don't know when what you say is going to change their life in a positive way. And it could change their life in a negative way too. But if you're saying stuff from a place of openness and vulnerability, like we talked about, whatever you say, it might negatively affect them in the moment, but it might help them learn something they need to learn. So just coming from that space of authenticity, I think it allows us to have an impact on each other and do the divine work in each other's lives. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, Sky, we're getting near the end of the broadcast here. We were talking earlier about this seminar. Now, what is it, and what can people expect?
Well, we're going to talk about our different views on his work on. He's got a book called The God Solution, talking about different ways to see God, and God as pure love is his perspective in this book. And I've done work on synchronicity, and I think synchronicity this describes the way that the divine shows up in our lives, and why we talk about divine appointment and the magic of events in life. So we're going to talk about these the connection between science and spirituality. Mm-hmm. And then I also have a workshop coming up in so that's on October 28th. You can find out more at the physicsofwholeness.com. And I have a workshop that I lead, which is every month. November 13th is the next one, and that's called Wholeness, Synchronicity, and Flow. So it's an invitation to go deep into the science of wholeness and what it means for synchronicity and how that unfolds in our lives.
Wow. Okay. And then so how can people get a hold? They just go to your website, or what happens there?
Yeah, physicsofwholeness.com has all the events that are going on for me, and you can sign up. The webinar is free, and that's coming up soon. And then the workshop is a sliding scale, so it's not expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we got links on our website for that, and so people can click on those and get to it really easy. Well, Sky, I appreciate you coming on the Edge broadcast. How'd you like the interview?
I loved it. Really enjoyable. We went all sorts of different new directions for me, so I enjoyed that.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for the time.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll send you links after edit and upload, and I'll appreciate you coming on the show.
All right. Appreciate you too. Thanks,
right.
Daniel.
All right. Bye-bye.